Welcome to our chat with two rabbis, Torah study and current events and more with Va-Dor with Rabbi Barry Silver and Rabbi Zvi Kahn. We are very pleased to offer this to the community and take it away, guys.
All right, well, we're in the aftermath of a very contentious election. And so Rabbi Kahn and I thought it would be good for us to talk about where do we go from here? How do we unify people? And also, what do we need to do to try to reform the various parties, the Democratic and the Republican parties? Where are they going wrong? And what suggestions do we have? And everybody is welcome to join in the discussion. And then afterwards, I do have my new song. I'm hoping that Rabbi Kahn will not consider it to be sacrilegious for me to play it. It's a song about Shabbat, but it's sung to the tune of the Four Tops, Sugar Pie, Honey Bunch.
Wow, I can't wait. Maybe you should start with that. You should open with that.
I think
That
you
sounds
should
pretty
start
good.
with it myself.
Okay, well, I just have to tell you that when Sharon and I are planning the Shabbat celebration, we're very concerned with the time. So it's like, I have to make sure that things pass her scrutiny. And it's very difficult for her to say, well, that's going to take 2 minutes. I don't know if we can spare 2 minutes on that. It's got to be good. So I'm not going to play the whole thing because Sharon's like, your songs are like 4 or 5 minutes long. They can't listen that long. So I'm just going to play like the first minute. Okay. So you can get a little flavor of it. I don't have the pictures to it yet, but I'm going to put pictures to it, but here it goes. Shabbat, you know that I love you. I can't help myself. It's the joy of being a Jew. On the seventh day, you come and you go, leaving love and joy behind with your radiant afterglow. When the choir singers call out God's name with the baruch, I can't help myself. I start singing it too. The Sabbath keeps my neshama growing stronger. After 6 days, I can't wait any longer. Can't help myself. I love Shabbat and everyone else. Shabbat, Shabbat, the joy of being a Jew. I can't help myself from loving my neighbor as thyself. I long for Shabbat, a day of peace and rest, to greet the Sabbath bride, and I get all cheered up inside. When I call God's name, this world is not the same. Oh, deep within my heart, I get a brand new start. I see the Sabbath flame, and love is now my aim. The sugar for Shabbat. You make the world seem new. I can't help myself. It's in the soul of every Jew. The sugar for Shabbat. She is the queen of days. I can't help myself. I love Shabbat in so many ways. When we read the Torah on Sabbath Eve, it is so sublime. I hang on every word, and I've kissed it 1,000 times. And we seek joy in blood. We read the Torah and recite the Shema. So let's celebrate and make this world great.
Great.
Wow, that's awesome. I love that song from the old days. That's
We're going to take it 10 to 8.
I'm going to put some pictures.
What time is the meeting?
Video, and You can share it with your friends. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. All right.
Great. Great words.
Now let's talk about some serious stuff. Now we've got the frivolous stuff out of the way. Rabbi Kahn, would you like to get the ball rolling and talk about your thoughts in the aftermath, where we go from here, and what we can do to fix up these political parties?
Sure.
We're not going to talk anymore. We're not going to talk about the Torah.
That's what I was going to ask. Did you?
The Torah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We got the Torah,
ahead,
the
Rabbi
Parsha.
Start with the Torah. Go ahead.
It's an important Parsha.
All right.
They all love
Since
it.
it's your bar mitzvah, Parsha, Rabbi, I definitely want to give you first talk, please.
Okay. Well, I really love this passage because Isaac reminds me a lot of how my dad responds to things. So Isaac is digging wells, and he has an uncanny ability to find water, which is so precious out in that part of the world. It's like striking gold or oil. So he finds oil, and the shepherds of Gerar come and say, their name sounds kind of like what they are. Their name is from Gerar. They're like, Grr! They're like, hey, that's our well. That's our water. So Isaac doesn't quarrel with them. He doesn't fight with them. He just says, all right, fine. And he goes away. So he digs another well, and the shepherds of Gerar come, Grr! That's our well. And he says, all right, whatever. So he goes and he digs another well. This time he finds water again, and he calls it Rehovot, which means spacious. And it's actually related to the word for street. Rehov means street and means spacious. So this time the shepherds of Gerar come to Isaac, and Isaac says, why are you here? Like they're coming in friendship. He goes, why are you here? Don't you really hate me? And they say, no, we don't hate you. We now recognize that you are a man of God, that you are blessed by God. We're not really sure why. Was it because he had this ability to find water, or was it his calm, peaceful demeanor that he didn't respond with fighting? He responded with peace. Said, you're a man of God. And then they lie. They say, we want a covenant with you. Treat us well, just like we treated you well, and do us no harm, just like we didn't harm you. And actually, they were very aggressive towards Isaac, and they did him a lot of harm. But Isaac doesn't respond. He has a perfect opportunity to clobber them rhetorically and say, what are you talking about, you liars? You did a lot of harm to us. He doesn't say a word. All he does is he prepares a banquet, and together they eat and they drink. And my father thought that was like, he said, if the whole Torah was destroyed, and this was all that was left of the Torah, this is the only passage left, this would give you an indication of what is important to our people, this peaceful demeanor. And so when I see what's going on in politics today and the world today, like there's so much fighting and arguing, and each one of us knows we have good reasons to be upset. We're all like, yeah, we got reasons to get mad. But if we're like Isaac, it doesn't matter. Getting mad doesn't serve any purpose. He was a no mad. He didn't get mad. And so this passage is really perfect for what we're talking about tonight. We're not saying that each side doesn't have grievances or issues with the other, but we're saying, who cares? What's the difference? Just let's be peaceful and let's talk and let's celebrate together. So that's why I think it's a
beautiful,
really awesome passage.
Really beautiful, really beautiful. I can see why your father, may rest in peace, was so attached to that story. I actually wanted to take a look at something in the first part of the parsha, just when the two baby boys are born. This is Isaac and Rebecca, Yitzchak and Rivka, and they have twins. Rivka has twins, and we are told that they are very different. These two little babies, right from the start, they're very, very different. And one is called, one comes out all reddish and hairy, and they give him the name Esav. In Hebrew, the word Esav, it has a meaning of something that's done, something that's made or complete. And Yaakov, the other child, Jacob, comes out holding on to grasping onto the ankle of his brother. And he's given the name Yaakov, which has two meanings. One meaning is actually akev, which means ankle, but another meaning is to struggle or to strive. And the rabbis of the Talmud say right from the start, that's the difference between these two. Esav, as he grows older, feels like I'm set. I'm a made man, so to speak. I don't need to grow. I don't need to work on myself. I don't need to strive to become a better person. I've got what it takes. And he's attracted to things out in the field. The Torah says he's ish sadeh, a man of the field, a person who knows how to hunt, a person who knows how to take care of himself in the outdoors. He's an outdoorsman and a woodsman, meaning that he's not interested in kind of spiritual internal pursuits. He's interested in the physical world, and he feels like he can handle everything out there. Jacob, on the other hand, is a person who says, the Torah calls him a person who sits inside of a tent, Yoshev Ohalim, which means someone who wants to have intellectual pursuits, spiritual pursuits, thinking about values, reflection, meditation, study. And so right off the bat, we kind of see, and I think it's very connected, Rabbi Silver, to what you just said a moment ago, that our patriarch Jacob is choosing a life path for himself that doesn't involve fighting or that kind of thing. It involves quiet reflection, study, growth, spiritual growth, values clarification. And that's what he's all about, constantly saying, how can I grow more? How can I learn more? As opposed to Esav, who says, I don't need to learn more, and I don't need to certainly I don't want to meditate. I'm a man of action. And so in the end, the Jewish tradition follows along the path of Jacob, of Yaakov, and Esau forms his own nation, his own people, and they go about their way, and they turn into a very warlike kind of bellicose type nation. So it's interesting to see that right from the start when the babies are born, I think.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and yeah, the two are so different. And also Esau sells his birthright, they say, for a mess of pottage. So he's the firstborn. He gets the birthright, even though they were twins, but he came out first.
Right.
And then he sells it for a mess of pottage, which it's interpreted to mean that he was interested in material things. He wanted food and carnal things. Jacob wanted things like a blessing and more spiritual matters. So Jacob definitely comes out better. Now, there's also a certain bias, because the people that write the history, they get to write it in their own bias. So Esau, as Rabbi Kahn says, is perceived as very bellicose, very warlike. And Jacob and the Jewish people, they're supposed to be very peaceful. But if you look at what the Jewish people did later on, they were anything but peaceful. They committed a lot of violent acts, but the Torah excuses it all by saying, well, God commanded it, so it's all good. But both sides were pretty violent. But Esau is definitely portrayed as the progenitor of the Arab nations and the ones that were in enmity with the Jewish people. And that's why they don't come across looking too good in the telling of the story. But we can learn lessons from it about how we should seek and strive for things that are more spiritual rather than just serving our carnal desires. The passage is a beautiful passage. I want to get your take, Rabbi Kahn, on the deception that Jacob practiced, and do you think it was justified? He deceived his father to get the birthright. Was it justified because he should have had the birthright all along, and so he was doing something that ends justify the means? Or do you think that it was improper? I was just curious about what your take on it. Maybe you could also share the Orthodox point of view, if there is such a thing, on this.
Just to go back to the story a little bit, so Rebecca, the mother, calls in Jacob and says, your father is planning to give his primary blessing to Esau. And she says, we can't let that happen. Let's take Esau's clothing and let's take some fur and let's put that on you, and I'll prepare a special meal. You go in and get the blessing. So Jacob right off the bat says, I can't do that because I will appear like a deceiver in my father's eye. My father will think I'm a deceiver, and then instead of blessing me, he will curse me. So the question really is asked not just by commentators, it's asked by Jacob himself, because he says, how can I pull off this deception? And his mother says to him, if there is a curse, it will be on me. You just need to listen to what I'm saying, because you need to get this blessing. And Jacob accepts this mission, and he puts on the clothing and the fur, and he takes the food.
Rabbi Kahn, if you notice, his objection was not that it was morally wrong to do this. It wasn't like, wait, that wouldn't be ethical. It was, what if I get caught? It was, do you think I can really pull it off? That's what he was concerned about, not the ethics of it, right?
There might be different ways to read that. I think when he says my father might view me as a deceiver, certainly it appears to me like he's saying, this is my father who I honor and I respect, this saintly man, Isaac, the patriarch, and I don't want him to think of me as a liar and a deceiver. But however you look at it, there's certainly the issue of deceit and deception is front and center. And it's a challenging one, and it's a difficult one. In any case, he goes in, and as he's speaking to his father, Isaac says to him, let me feel you, let me touch you. And he feels the clothing, and he feels the fur, the hairiness. And he says a very important and interesting, fascinating phrase. He says, your hands are the hands of Esau, but your voice is the voice of Jacob. That was, and that was his way of saying, the way you talk, the sound of your voice and the way you talk, the words that you're using make you seem like my son Jacob. And yet when I feel you and I hug you and I embrace you, you feel like my son Esau. So Isaac himself is confused and unsure of exactly which son he is. Some commentators think he actually knew it was Jacob. Some don't think so. They think he was completely fooled. The question of deception and whether or not the ends justify the means, I think, is a very important one. The way that I've always understood the story myself is that based on his mother's guidance, the Jacob accepted upon himself to go in and to do this as a way of trying to show the father that his view of Esau was mistaken. He thought the father, the Torah tells us, had very great, strong feelings of love for his oldest son, for his son Esau, for the older of the two twins. And so Jacob and the mother, Rebecca, were trying to say that's mistaken. That's not the right approach. Jacob is going to be the one to carry on the tradition of the Jewish people. So was it a deception? It's hard to argue that it was not a deception. Was their intention and their motivation coming from a good place and ultimately a correct place? I think yes. So that's the way I've always kind of understood it.
Yeah, the way I learned it, studying with my dad and others, is that he clearly was deceptive, and his only concern was that if his father found out, not that it was morally wrong, but he would be cursed. It was only, how is this going to affect me if I get caught? There was never any discussion about, is this ethically correct? The way my father explained it to me is that our forefathers in Judaism are unique. Most cultures, they portray their ancestors as perfect beings, and they were these great people. Judaism portrays our ancestors, warts and all, but what makes them great is that they were able to change and grow and mature. And as Rabbi Kahn says, Jacob was able to grow and overcome some of his earlier foibles. So he was a deceiver. And then what happened was, and he had other deceptions too, but what happened was later on, he struggles with God. And that's what the name Yisrael means. And his name was changed, struggling with God. After he had the struggle with God, or you could say he had a struggle with his conscience, after that, he changed. And then he met Esau, and he was going to run away, but instead of being a deceiver, he was straightforward. He went right up to him, and he confronted him, and he didn't run away, and he didn't hide, and he was completely honest at that point on. And when his name changed to Yisrael, his personality changed. And what that tells us is that all of us, we all have faults. We shouldn't look at our forefathers and foremothers like, oh, well, they were perfect. I can't be like that. I'm no Jacob or I'm no Abraham. And what the Torah is trying to tell us is, yeah, you are. These people are just like us. The difference is they were able to evolve because they had this calling and this sense of godliness within them, and it made them change who they were. And that's the point of the story of Jacob. And also you can see with Joseph also, who started out very brash and as a bragger. And then by the time he's done, he's like transformed. So that's the beauty of these stories.
Beautiful. I like that a lot. Sharon.
I wanted to ask, because in a lot of these parshas, the names of the parties change. Avram to Abraham, Sarai to Sarah, and now we see Yaakov to Yisrael. So is it because of what Rabbi Silver just said, in that their personality, or they changed, or they were growing, that they chose to change their names in the biblical stories, or was it something else?
The name that people are called has great significance in the Torah. And so when they change the name, it indicates that there's a change of status, that they're now viewed differently. And the classic example is with Jacob, who is now one who struggled with God. Another interesting case of this was Joseph. Joseph changed his name and took on an Egyptian name. He was called for a while by an Egyptian name, and he took on the trappings of his Egyptian culture. But yes, the name has great significance in the Torah, and when they change their name, that's indicating that there's a change of status for the person.
Yeah, what's also really interesting to think about is sometimes the name change, the second name, the new name completely replaces the first name. For example, the Torah says your name will be Abraham or Avraham, and you will no longer be called Abraham, which was Abraham's original name. But in the case of Jacob, we see for the rest of the Torah, Jacob is sometimes referred to as by his new name Israel, and sometimes he's referred to by his original name Jacob, which leads to all kinds of interesting analysis in terms of why that is. Why is he sometimes referred to as Jacob? Why is he sometimes referred to as Israel? But Rabbi Silver's basic thesis that he's presenting is absolutely on target in the sense that the person's mission in life and their growth has led them to a point when it's almost as if they're a new person. They now have reached a level when they can be considered like a new person.
And the whole point of Judaism itself is that at any moment we should be able to sacrifice the person we are for the person that we could become. Judaism is all about renewal, and that you don't have to be the same person that you were before. You can change and be transformed by religious inspiration or by godliness, and the change of name indicates that ability to transform. Now, I'll give you the reason, probably the 3,000th reason why I don't believe that the Torah is inerrant and it was written by an infallible being, and that is because of what Rabbi Kahn brought up. It actually says in the Torah, your name shall now be Yisrael, no longer shall you be called Jacob. And right after he says, no longer shall you be called Jacob, boom, he's called Jacob. So the prediction by God is wrong. Now, the Orthodox have a lot of fun trying to explain, well, he was called Jacob because of this or the other thing. It's easier for people who don't take the Torah literally. We can just say, well, they messed up. This is a different tradition. And in this tradition, they didn't realize that his name was changed, or this anachronistic, and they just jumbled things together. We don't have to deal with all those problems. But for the Orthodox, this is a serious problem. And they spent lots and lots and lots of ink trying to explain how is it that he's now called Jacob when he said he would never be called Jacob again. And this type of thing recurs quite a few times. But this is one example of a prediction that was totally erroneous. So, Rabbi Kahn, do you have an explanation about that?
I kind of embrace the vagueness and lack of consistency in the Torah. I think that the Torah reflects life. There's a wonderful statement in the Talmud which says God looked into the Torah and then he created the world. And I think that means lots of different things to lots of different people. But one of the things that I think it means is that the same way human life and life on our planet is so full of contradictions and mysteries and things that we think are one way and they turn out to be a different way. I think that's the way the Torah is. The Torah presents us with not one reality, but all kinds of different realities, and things that seem to be consistent in one place are totally different in a different place, and things are looked at from all kinds of different perspectives. And that to me is a more realistic way of reflecting human life and human experience. No matter how much in life we want to grab onto things and say, this is it, this is solid, this will never change. That's never accurate. Life always changes. It's always different. There's always new perspectives. And I think that's what the Torah is all about. To me, that's one of the things that makes learning Torah so dynamic and exciting.
But does the Torah, in your opinion, have error in it? You said the Torah is like life. And on earth and life, people make mistakes. So are you suggesting also the Torah has mistakes, as if people make mistakes and so God could too? Or do you think that the Torah has no mistakes? This is just some kind of different perspective. Because to me, a lot of people say, well, it's just two different ways of viewing things. But it's really not. If God says point blank, you won't be called Jacob ever again, and then he's called Jacob, that's wrong. That's a clear-cut error. That's not like two people looking at a car accident and saying, oh, I think it's this guy's fault or this guy's fault. That's just blatant error. So are you saying that there's errors in the Bible, or is there some way of reconciling all that?
What I'm saying is that the people in the Bible, and it connects to what you mentioned before about how we look at our leaders and our progenitors. The people in the Bible make all kinds of mistakes and all kinds of errors. And I'll take it a step further. The Torah portrays God as apparently making errors at different times, right? God thinks that everything's going to work well with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And then before you know it, that didn't work out and he has to exile them from the Garden of Eden. God has all this big population and everything. Apparently his plan is everything's going to be fine. And then he says, I regret that I created all of these people and I'm going to wipe them out with a flood. So the Torah goes to such an extreme degree of talking about mistakes and errors and thinking something else happening, that it's even willing to present that as if it refers to God. But to me, things like the fact that the example that we're talking about, it says your name will no longer be called Jacob, and then it is called Jacob. That to me does not strike me as, oh my gosh, the Torah made a mistake and that's an error. That's one of the hundreds and thousands of things that are very legitimate questions that we ask when we study Torah, and we strive, like Jacob strived, we struggle and strive and wrestle with those questions in order to be able to explain them. And I think that's what one of our big jobs and missions in life is, to delve into the Torah and grapple with all of those things that might seem like contradictions, might look like problems or issues, and try and explain them using our intellect as best as we can.
Yeah. I'll just leave it at this. There's a scientific principle called parsimony, which means if you have two different explanations, go with the simplest one. That's probably the right one. So to me, the simplest explanation is it was written by people and they messed up. The more complicated response, or the more complicated answer is it was written by God, but he makes some mistakes. There's things that aren't clear and you have to resolve it. When you postulate that, you have to do a lot more explaining. It's much, much, much more difficult. And therefore, I believe, according to parsimony, you might want to move towards the position that maybe it was written by people. I just want to ask Rabbi Kahn, before we leave this, is it possible that some of the Torah was written by people, in your opinion? Or is it possible that God delivered the Torah to Moses, but he was old, and maybe by the time he got around to writing it down, he forgot some of it, or he made some mistakes? Or maybe there were certain interpolations afterwards. Do you leave room for those possibilities? Or is it your position that every word came out of God and therefore it's all inerrant and perfect?
Well, when you say, do I think that people wrote it, the Torah was written by a person, right? That we're not told anywhere in the Torah that God suddenly out of the sky, a Torah dropped down and Moshe and Moses caught it. Moshe wrote down the Torah, and that process did take place over time. It didn't take place only at one specific moment. It took place over time. Interestingly enough, the issue of Moses possibly forgetting certain things is actually discussed by the rabbis at a certain point when he appears to have forgotten a certain law. And that whole issue of forgetting, and even Moses possibly forgetting something, is taken into account as a possibility on one specific incident. But in terms of your fundamental question, I think it's fair to say that certainly speaking for myself, but I think in this case it's fair to say the Orthodox Jewish approach in general is to say that the Torah comes from a divine origin, and it was dictated by God to Moshe. And that's what Moses wrote down, and therefore we believe that it is without error, not without complication. It includes tremendous complexity, but without error.
Well, why would you say it's without error then if Moses wrote it down? It is my understanding that the Orthodox belief is that God didn't just dictate it to Moses and just let him write it down when he got around to it. That my understanding is the Orthodox belief is that God was overseeing the entire process and like guiding Moses' hand to make sure there's no error. Because once you acknowledge, well, Moses wrote it down, the whole premise of an inerrant Bible, or the Bible being God's word, is just out the window. Because Moses, who knows what he might have done? He might have forgot, he might have written it down later, he could have made mistakes. So my understanding is that the Orthodox believe that God guided his hand to write the Torah, and that every single letter is God given. Is that your understanding also? Is that the prevailing view in Orthodoxy?
Yes, yes. I wasn't trying to say something different than that. I was just trying to say that the belief isn't that it happened all at one time, meaning one narration starting at point A and continuing until the Torah was finished, but that each time Moses wrote something down, God was dictating to Moses what words and things to write down. And there are very interesting discussions in the Talmud about places where Moses questioned God and said, do you really want me to say that? Is that really the best way to write it? Which makes for a fascinating conversation. But yes, that's the basic concept. Yes.
Right. Okay. Very good. Okay. Do you want to talk about the political parties a little bit?
Sure. I think let's
go right ahead.
Politics a little bit. My take on both the Republicans and the Democrats at some points is a little bit like Shakespeare's line, a plague on both your houses. And by that, what I mean is, I think both parties have become very extreme. There's a great attraction, apparently, in both the Democratic side and the Republican side to extreme positions. And it's hard nowadays to be a moderate in either party. And it's hard to be a person who says, I want to work with the other side. I want us to be practical. I want us to be pragmatic. I want us to work together. Yes, we approach things from different perspectives often. Yes, we have sometimes different fundamental philosophies, whether it's economic policy or foreign policy or domestic issues, climate change, whatever it might be. Yes, we might be coming at things differently. But it's hard and getting rarer and rarer to find people who say, okay, there's always been a history of differences in politics, but the way to be successful for the American people is to work together, be practical, be pragmatic, be reasonable, make accommodations, make concessions so that we can come up with the right policies to move forward. And I think that now is sorely missed. And I think both sides, to a degree, to my mind, that's what they really need to work on, is getting back to an ideology that says we need to take our different views and come together and work things out to come up with policies. Is one side going to get everything at once? No. Is the other side going to get everything at once? No. But we can accomplish a lot if the two sides start working together again, start communicating, and start respecting each other.
You know, Rabbi Kahn, I'm reminded of the quote by Goldwater. Not sure exactly how it goes, but it's something like, extremism in defense of justice is no vice, and moderation in pursuit of liberty is no virtue. And I'm just wondering, when you say the both parties are extremist, what is it that you find extremist about the Democratic Party? Because to me, they're just like mamby-pamby. They're not nearly extreme enough for my liking. What is it that you find to be extreme about the Democratic Party? Are you referring to like the very far left who are on the fringe?
I'm referring to several things. Let's just take one example, the phenomenon of a Bernie Sanders and a socialist type of viewpoint. And by the way, I think it's important when we talk about socialism not to hear communism, because a lot of people have a knee-jerk reaction and they say anyone who talks about socialism or socialized medicine or socialized, whatever it might be, the platforms of the socialist type of approach, thinks, oh, well, that's communist. That's really inaccurate. And so I don't have a knee-jerk reaction that says, I mean, there are many countries in the world that have a socialist type approach to different things, and it's very beneficial and it works for them. But
you mean like Israel?
I think Israel's a good example in terms of socialized medicine. I mean, you can go just up the border into Canada and you have socialized medicine in different countries,
Well, not just Canada. Every single industrialized country in the world has universal health care except for the United States. So I don't find that an extreme position at all. I find an extreme position to suggest that a child shouldn't have access to health care because their parents don't make enough money. To me, that's an extreme position. Or if somebody gets sick, they should have to go into poverty and lose everything because they can't pay their health bills. To me, that's a very extreme position. So, and I'm not sure what you mean by like the Bernie Sanders position. What is it about Bernie Sanders that you find extreme? And also, Bernie Sanders is not, his view failed in the Democratic Party. His view was not adopted. They adopted a very moderate view in the Democratic Party.
I think, let me answer the first part first. The kinds of things I'm referring to are when ideologies, let me phrase it differently. When we talk about policy as being based more on ideology than on what's practically can be workable and be pragmatic, that to me is a type of extremism. So if we say, all of us can agree that every single child, if every child in the United States could have their education be paid for from pre-K, from nursery school up through college, and graduate school, that would be a fantastic, wonderful thing. But I don't believe there's an economist in the world that thinks that the United States can pay for that, can put that in the budget and actually afford to pay for every child to have a quality education that never was paid for. So the idea, I'm sorry, just give me 1 second. So what I'm referring to simply is, I think that ideas, policies have to be based on a combination of an ideology coming from values and what we think is best for the United States, for the citizens of the United States. And it has to be combined with a pragmatic approach, which is sometimes as simple as, how are we going to pay for that? How can we have all these different things that we have to pay for in the United States budget? And yes, we can say maybe there's less on defense and that can come over there. There's all kinds of things that we can do. But when people take an approach that says we have to have all of this, and worrying about how to pay for it is somehow not a problem for us, that I call that extremism.
But what's extreme about the Democratic Party, though? What position do they have that you find extreme?
Well, my impression, my understanding is that there are major figures in the Democratic Party who are saying things like, we have to have universal education for everyone through college, and don't have realistic plans as to how that, and don't seem to be overly concerned with coming up with realistic. I think if you have people who say the issues on protests and demonstrations, and let's shut down the police and not fund the police, I view that as an extreme position. I think one of the foundations of our country is to say, of course, we have to have civic law and order, and the police are there to protect the citizens of this country from things like violent demonstrations and looting and burning. And if you turn around and say, you know what the problem is? It's not the looters, it's the police. Get rid of the police and we won't have a problem. I view that as extremism.
Yeah, well, let me just share my perspective on that.
Sure.
The Democratic Party has never suggested at all that we should defund the police. In fact, Biden specifically said he's not for that. And the Democratic Party is not extreme on that at all. The Democratic Party is right in the middle of the mainstream. Biden says we shouldn't do it. Kamala Harris is a prosecutor. The Democratic Party has never said defund the police. There's some wackos on the far left who have suggested, along with Black Lives Matter, about defunding police. But what they really mean is, they're using it as a slogan. They really mean reorganizing the police in some way. But whatever it is, it's ludicrous. But that's not the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party doesn't adopt that. Regarding universal health care, the Democratic Party doesn't adopt it. They did some program that I think is ridiculous. It's the Obamacare program. That was like a compromise, and it's ridiculous. It's telling everybody that they have to have insurance. Universal health care is not an extreme position at all. It's actually cheaper. It's a lot cheaper than what we have now. It's more practical, and it's done in every industrialized country. It's not an extreme position. It's just portrayed that way. Now, let me just also talk about socialism. We already have socialized education. Every child is guaranteed education through high school, and they don't pay for it. How is that provided? We pay taxes, and the government provides it. That is called socialism. We have socialism, it's called Social Security. We have socialism, it's called Medicare. We have many social programs. We already have socialism. This use of the term to demonize people is crazy. As far as communism goes, you're right, Rabbi Kahn, we don't have it. Israel does. Israel has the kibbutz. That was like the mainstay of Jewish idealists, is the kibbutz, which is actually communism. Israel itself is socialist. And I find it funny that many right-wing Jews, a lot of them, go around condemning socialism when Israel is a socialist state. And I also find it rather bizarre that right-wing, traditional, Orthodox, conservative Jews condemn socialism when socialism is the entire dominant theme of the entire Torah. The Torah goes beyond socialism. It says that if you own land, you have to allow people to walk onto your property, and you have to leave food for them so they can come onto your property and start picking food off of your property. You have to leave it for the poor and for the widow. That's even beyond socialism. But the Torah is as socialist as you get. It's providing for redistribution of wealth and giving to the poor and tithing and everything else. And just by the way, the Christian scripture is even more socialist, and the fundamentalist Christians are even more against socialism. Jesus said, if you want to be my disciple, take all your possessions, sell them all, give the proceeds to the poor, and live off of nothing. And it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than a rich person to get into heaven. So it's just funny to me. Well, it's not really funny, it's kind of sad that the conservative Jews and Republicans both condemn socialism, and their holy books that they say is God's word, not everybody else. They're the ones who are saying it's God's word. They say it's God's word, and they completely ignore it. Now, what I would like to say about the political parties, I have problems with the Democratic Party, but it's a little different than yours, Rabbi Kahn. I don't think they go far enough. I think that they have been too meek in seeking Jewish ideals, the ideals of helping the poor, the idea of helping the immigrant, the idea of protecting the planet. I don't think they've gone nearly far enough. And I think that our country is in a heap of trouble because nobody is going far enough on these issues. There's certain issues that call for drastic measures, and the planet is one of them. Half measures aren't going to work. What I have against the Democratic Party, and it's a serious, serious challenge, is that, well, first of all, they try to be Republican light. So they try to do the same types of things as Republicans, but not quite as much, instead of taking a strong stand. But worse, they take money from very, very bad people, and they're compromised. And Rabbi Kahn, you know the passage well, that it says that do not accept a bribe, because a bribe will blind the eyes of the most perspicacious, and it will twist the words of the wise. So campaign finance contributions is legalized bribery. And the Democratic Party feeds from the same trough as the Republicans. And therefore, they do all types of things that are not pure and good because they're also taking money from these lobbyists. So my problem with them is that they don't do enough to live up to their ideals. They have these ideals, but they sacrifice them. As far as the Republican Party, I think that they've just completely abandoned any notion of Jewish idealism whatsoever. Like every Jewish value that we have, helping the poor, helping the immigrant, telling the truth, treating women properly, everything that you can think of, they've abandoned. And so I just find the Democratic Party say the right things and often do the wrong things. The Republicans say the wrong things and do the wrong things. And Trump is a perfect example. The reason why they followed after him is because he was doing all the wrong things, but they don't really care. It's just a matter of power. And I'll just share one other thing that I find quite offensive. And that is that if you look at the Biden-Harris ticket, they're coming in and they're bringing their pets and their dogs, and they're very kind towards animals. And if you look at Trump, they don't have a dog. All he has is a couple of kids who had their picture taken with some animals from Africa slaughtered, like dead animals that they're bragging about. Hey, we killed these animals. And I think, like my dad said about that passage, if you knew nothing else, just that one thing, that they think that it's something to brag about, to have dead, beautiful wild animals from Africa with your picture taken. I just think that pretty much says it all. Kindness to animals leads to kindness to people. And I think both parties have failed to challenge their own foibles. And also the Democratic Party, I have to say this, the Democratic Party has utterly failed to champion Israel, to defend Israel as a bastion of civil rights, to speak out against radical Islam, to speak about the dangers of Islam, I think the Democratic Party has completely failed. And one thing that Trump did that was very, very good, and which is why he has the respect of so many Jewish people, not mine, but because the other things totally outweigh it, but he's gone a long way towards treating Israel the way Israel should have been treated, by discontinuing funding of money going to the Palestinian Authority that they use to pay killers, that they reward killers with blood money, that he's recognized the Golan, and that he transferred the embassy to Jerusalem. He's done a lot of things that the Democratic Party should have done and didn't. And the Democratic Party, as far as I can see, is doing nothing to correct that. And now that Harris has a Jewish husband, and there's going to be Jews in the White House, you know, the kids of Biden marry Jewish people, I'm hoping that maybe they'll correct it, but I don't see that happening. My battery is running low. I got to go in the other room for a second. And Rabbi Kahn, I'd love to get your response. Go right ahead. I'm going to just run out for a second and I have to get a cable and put it right back in, but go right ahead.
Sure. I'd love to open it up, you know, to everybody. People must have a lot of feelings and thoughts, questions about, comments about these issues. So I'm okay shifting over to that part.
Okay. Does anybody have any comments they'd like to share about what was just shared about? Unmute yourself, Emily. Go ahead.
I've said this a gazillion times. The Democratic Party did not play to its audience. And that's the problem. I don't think Israel was as much of an issue as you bring it up, Rabbi. I know this is a temple discussion, so we should focus on Israel. But that was not what was wrong with the Democratic Party. Democratic Party is controlled by old white people. And there was very little consideration given to the Hispanic population, some given to the fear and the justifiable paranoia of the Black people, but they didn't consider a lot of other minorities. It was run by, and it still is run by, old white people. And until that changes, I can't wholeheartedly support the Democratic Party. Republican Party, on the other hand, is run by old rich white people, which makes it even worse. So leave it there.
Yeah, you know, I disagree with that position. I know a lot of the classic liberals agree with that. I think that as an abysmal moral failure to not recognize Israel. I don't care if the Jews make up 1%, 0.5%, a millionth of a percent. I don't care. It's the right thing to do to support a democratic country in the Middle East, which is struggling for survival. It's not a matter of, and not only that, the fundamentalist Christians deeply care about Israel. And that was a huge part of his base. And a huge part of the base was built not just on the Jewish people, it was the vast number of fundamental Christians who were very, very, very loyal to Israel. And so politically it was dumb also, but it's morally wrong and it's politically wrong. But it fits into a general pattern. And the pattern is with the Democratic Party. It's don't support Israel as strongly as you should, don't recognize Israel, and also be soft on radical Islam. And don't pay attention to the fact that we are fighting wars and spending trillions of dollars and losing thousands of people to an ideology that says that you should kill people who don't believe the way you do. And so they just totally ignore that ideology and trivialize it. Meanwhile, they also trivialize that Christianity has the same type of ideology and has been slaughtering people for years. They don't mention that because they're Christian. So there's just rampant hypocrisy going on. And also, the other thing the Democratic Party did that was horrible, in my opinion, is they pandered to Black Lives Matter. This is just something that was politically and morally outrageous. If you want to say about the slogan, Black Lives Matter, I'm there. I'm all for it. Of course, Black Lives Matter. But the organization that hijacked the movement was steeped in anti-Semitism, violence towards police, anarchy, and sometimes they even literally went into Jewish neighborhoods and started desecrating Jewish places. And the Democratic Party failed to rein them in. And that cost them big time in the election. If they would stand up against these things, it would have made a huge difference. And the Democratic Party needs to take a strong stand on this. And they should have reacted, and they didn't. And they also terribly failed to react to the charge of socialism, which the Hispanic community, they started going towards Trump saying, oh, I don't want to go with the Democrats, they're socialists. That's complete nonsense, because Trump acted far more like the dictators that they were used to, Chavez and Castro, vilifying the press, demonizing enemies, causing race wars, not accepting a peaceful transition to power. I mean, he resembled these guys to a T, and they were played. So I think that the Democratic Party has a lot to reform.
Okay, Gloria, and then Emily, unless Rabbi Zvi, would you like to jump in on that?
No, I know.
Go ahead, Gloria. No microphone, Gloria.
Oh, I'll get closer, but I'm fading. That's okay. You don't have to see my face. Anyway, I want to respond to what Emily said. I feel very optimistic about young people starting to pull the reins. We're talking about Beto O'Rourke. We're talking about Pete Buttigieg, Stacey Abrams. I think young people are up and coming, and I think it's very encouraging. Also, if you'll pardon me, because you know me, I get silly once in a while. When Rabbi was talking about the horror of the Trump kids posing with dead animals, I can't help but think about Sarah Palin. Does anybody remember when she was speaking that they were slaughtering chickens behind her? I mean, how disgusting. You know, some people just don't have morals, and I'm going to end on that one.
Emily, you had something else to say?
Well, you know, just that I think that both parties ignored a lot of the problems in this country. Nobody's talking about infrastructure until a bridge falls down. Nobody, you know, nobody's talking about really the poverty level, the hunger, you know.
Not yet, but
they talk about the stock market as far as wealth is concerned, but don't talk about the people in the bread lines or whatever you want to call them now. So,
Call from Terry Snibbly.
excuse me, I've got a phone call. I apologize. One of my kids.
I hear the Democrats talking about the problems of the pandemic and people being out of work all the time. I mean, I find that they comment on that quite a bit.
And we have
anybody else?
I was going to say we have Reverend Barber, who's doing a marvelous thing with the Poor People's Project. So we are making tracks. People are trying. Emily, you're muted.
But it's not the party that's doing it. It's not the focus of either party. The parties are focusing on things that, except for the top 1%, don't hit home with the majority of people. And I know I'm just too far to the left. So,
no, but as far as infrastructure is concerned, that's coming. Believe me, that is coming. It's not one of the top priorities at this point, but I think it will be coming because they are speaking about that and they understand. And I think Biden and Harris will make sure that we start creating jobs that way.
You know, I think we really need to just move off of this left and right ideology completely and not even talk about moving to the left or the right. I think it's very unproductive. I think that protecting the planet, conserving nature should be a conservative value. I don't think it makes sense to even talk about it that way. But when it comes to helping the poor, there is vast amount of suffering right now because people have lost jobs. They're about to be tossed out of their apartments.
Yeah.
They have no food. They have no prospects. There is massive, massive suffering right now. And what the country refuses to acknowledge is that there's something systemically wrong about our whole economic system, where people can just be cast out on the street. There's no real safeguards, and that's what happens in a capitalist system. That's why I like things that are more socialistic. This is a very dangerous situation. I think the coronavirus points out how dangerous it is to have a system where if you don't have a job, you don't have healthcare, you don't have a place to live. This is very scary. So I think we need to do a lot to help the poor. But on the other hand, I don't agree with the Democratic Party, which tends to have the position, we're just going to give more money, just give more money into programs and to people, that's going to do the trick. If you want to cure poverty, you have to manage the size of your families. You have to have families that are intact. You have to have two parents who are bearing, who have children. You have to avoid teenage pregnancy. If you want to challenge poverty, you can't just toss money at it. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
The Democratic Party refuses to go down that discussion. And if you ever engage in it, then you're a racist, or you're not sympathetic, or you're a conservative, or you're not liberal, or whatever. The Democratic Party refuses to talk honestly. You can't help minority people if they're having lots of kids out of wedlock, not having education, and having a society with drugs in it. It's not going to work. So the only way to help people out of poverty is to say, we want to empower you, we want to help you, but you got to also help yourself. You got to use family planning. You got to educate people. You got to get rid of all the guns. You got to work with the community, and you can't just have a mindset like, poor me, I was a slave, now give me some money. It doesn't work. And we need to have honest, real discussion. And you have the Republicans who are just blaming the poor and saying it's your fault, which is wrong. There is a legacy of slavery, and there still is institutionalized racism. Then you have the Democrats saying it's not your fault at all, you did nothing wrong. Here, take some more money. And both sides don't get it. If we actually could talk to each other, I think we could come up with real solutions. And that is what is missing.
Suzanne.
Yeah.
I feel we're spending a lot of time discussing politics, which a lot of it is very corrupt. What I think we should be doing is focusing what we can do in our communities, because that's where we need to make a difference. This congregation was built on going out and doing community service, helping people that may be hungry. We used to have the food drive for Yom Kippur. We should be looking at things like that we can do. I feel that education is vital really to equaling people of poverty, that we have to do a better job of educating. I say to myself, why is it that a teacher makes so little money, but an athlete's paid millions? So I think we should be focusing more on what we can do and work on that instead of talking about what we can't do or what we can't fix. We need to start working in our community, and that's where I like to see the congregation going in the future. And that's my suggestion tonight.
Thank you.
Rabbi Kahn, go ahead.
No, I'm nodding because I think it's such a good point, Susanna. Very often I find myself in conversations or reading articles or editorials or newspapers or watching shows, and the conversations all seem very relevant and interesting. But when you asked the question you just asked was, well, all that's great, but what does that have to do with our community and practical efforts to help people here? I always am like, wow, that's so true. So I was just nodding my head to say you're absolutely right. And there obviously is a place for both kinds of conversations, because to whatever degree that we can be part of affecting, change and getting things moving politically in a better direction is a good thing. But we shouldn't forget all the things that we can do if we apply our energies locally to people in need. And there's so many people in need in so many different ways. So I just couldn't agree more with what you said.
Thank
Well,
you.
I could agree more. I agree with a lot of what Suzanne's saying, because we had a vigorous social action committee. And I've been involved in social action for a long time. And I agree with Suzanne, social action is where it's at. And we should definitely resurrect the social action committee. It disbanded with the pandemic, but we should resurrect it. And I'd be glad to do it. But I don't see the dichotomy. I don't see like, well, we shouldn't be talking about politics. We should be talking about this. I think you have to talk about both. You have to be involved in both, because you can do all the social action you want in your community. But if you have a government that is rejecting any effort to deal with climate change, you're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. You can do all you want as far as dealing with people and trying to make them peaceful. But if you have crazy people running around getting access to semi-automatic weapons, you're going to have violence in your schools and in your society all day long. You can do all the social action you want. But if you have government that is making bad policies and not helping the poor, you couldn't possibly do enough to help the poor if the government's not behind you. And if you're relying on people to try to cure all the ills and the government's not there, it's never, ever going to happen. It's got to be. The government is leading the way, the government's empowering people, and the people are engaging in social action, working in conjunction with the government, like what Kennedy did when he said, we're going to do the Peace Corps, and I'm going to send people out there and I'm going to support it. And then people said, hey, that's great. And they went out and did it. It's got to be both working together. It's definitely not an either or type of proposition, in my opinion.
So one of the things that we can do in support of what Suzanne said was we can do a food drive where our members drive up and donate food onto a table. So all they have to do is pull up and they can have it in their trunk or in their back seat. And we just have volunteers just take it out and put it on a table. You can have, food for families or Palm Beach Food Bank come and pick it up. It's an easy way without anybody getting out of their car, without anybody having to take their face mask off or on. And they can be safe, and we can collect food for people that are poor and give that to the food bank to distribute for the holidays or upcoming December when people need it the most. I was just involved in one today, as a matter of fact, that they did the same thing. They drove up and did those things. So I think that's something that we can do right now. And it doesn't take a lot of effort to coordinate. So
That's a great idea. I also think that on Shabbat, we could partner with different organizations each Shabbat and say that we're going to take a fraction of the donations and give it to a different organization, maybe like the ASPCA, maybe an environmental group, maybe a group that's helping Israel. And in that way, what would happen is the organization that we partner with would then send our Shabbat celebration potentially out to all of their members. And then we could increase the membership because people might be interested in that issue and they might promote it. And the beautiful thing is that we're making so little money right now each Shabbat that even if we gave a large percentage, it wouldn't make a darn bit of difference because we're bringing in virtually nothing anyway. So it could only help. So I think like each week we could have another organization that we partner with and give them 10, 15% or something of the proceeds. And I think it would help us and it would help them too. But I like your idea, Sharon. I think we should implement it, but not just for holidays. We could do it on an ongoing basis where people could bring the food up, have a place to keep it, and then people could pick it up. I think it's great.
We have, it has to be a one-shot thing because we have no place to store it or anything like that. So it'd have to be one day, a couple of hours where people drive up, donate, and then we either take it to one of the food banks or they pick it up from there because we have no place to store it. So, and food goes bad. So I think that's something that we should do. As far as donations, I like the idea, but we've got zero coming in. So we have to change that zero to be a better, bigger number.
Well, this is the way to do it.
Possibly.
Anybody else?
I just want to say something to Pat, who's Canadian. Every time I talk to my friend from Toronto and we complain about what's going on here, we keep saying, oh, we'll all move to Canada, and with global warming, it'll be warm up there. And she keeps saying to us, we don't want you. As a matter of fact, we will take you. So,
Oh, goodness. That's not
Well,
good.
Yeah.
Well, I think the moral of the story is that we have a lot to learn from the story of Isaac, and we need to talk to each other, and we need to be able to have civil conversations. And Rabbi Kahn, I appreciate your contributions towards making that happen. I think it's happening here, and we're
Thank
making
you
a
so much.
contribution. Thank you, everybody, for
Always
joining
happy,
in.
always happy to be
Thank
here.
you, guys. Shalom, Shavua Tov. We wish you
Shalom,
well
Shavua
this
Tov.
week. Stay safe, be healthy.
And don't miss our Shabbat celebration. It's going to be really good. And if I can put pictures to the song, I'll try to incorporate it. If not, next time. But we'd love to see you there and spread the word. The other thing that I did in the Shabbat, I mentioned different names for what this concept is that we're doing, and people can watch and hear it. And then if they want, they can on the Zoom afterwards, if they feel like it, they can call in and let us know what name strikes their fancy. So hope to see you then, and thanks everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi Kahn. Thank you, Rabbi Silver.